The next one on the list is Pathologic. I haven't played Pathologic 1, but I've finished most of Pathologic 2. And from, I hear on good authority, Mandalore Gaming, who has done both, he says once you've played 2, there's really no reason to play 1. It is not really a sequel, it is more of a remake. So, but I think Pathologic is an interesting inclusion. I think a lot of people might not put it, but I definitely would. And Pathologic is a game that definitely goes down the other route, where it's trying to just create a very immersive, convincing experience and get you lost in a simulated game world. But it's not, I mean, it gives you player choice, but it's not a game that's just its design goal is not to just, hey, do whatever you want, play it the way you want to play it, have fun. You play it the way you want to play it, but it is more about that immersive experience. And in the case of Pathologic, it's not really you play it the way you want to play it. You play it the way you can play it. It is one of the most unforgiving games I've ever played, but it is really, really an excellent experience. And it is, it's also a game that I understand games should be about fun, but I think it can be fun to role play different things. I think one of the selling points of games like Wasteland and Fallout is you are role-playing what it would be like to be living through such the horrific aftermath of such terrible events. It is sort of fun to think about being in the post-apocalypse. It's fun to think about like giant pools of radioactive sludge everywhere. It is, something like Half-Life. Half-Life being in like those facilities and stuff like that. It's fun to think about, coming upon the worst possible outcome for humanity. It's fun to think, maybe fun's the wrong word, but it's interesting and there's something attractive about it, but it may not be fun. Now games like Fallout and Wasteland can be fun, but there are also post-apocalyptic games like S.T.A.L.K.E.R, for example, which aren't necessarily about fun. They are about the player having an experience, role-playing an experience, and getting lost in that world. And so I'd say Pathologic is definitely like that. It's not a game that's about fun. And I think that's where sort of Warren Spector's sort of go down the player choice path differs, where those games are really about player choice is ultimately trying to lead to fun. The other thing, Thief is about the experience and about the simulation and about immersion. It just happens to be fun, really fun. Pathologic is a game that I wouldn't call fun, but it's enjoyable to roleplay or simulate that experience. The experience of being in an incredibly desperate situation. A very sort of depressing, dour, desperate situation. There is something about that. I mean, this goes even into talking about like Death Stranding. Like some people are like, well, it's just a package simulator. What's the point? Isn't that so boring? It is boring, and it is not fun. It is hard. It is arduous. It is boring, and that's kind of the appeal. That, you're sort of simulating what it would be like to be in the situation where you just have to walk these packages through these large environments, one place to the other, and, you risk them, tumbling down a mountain because you lose your footing and losing all the packages and things like that. So there is something in gaming, because gaming is not just about like fun because games are fun. It's about, okay, let's simulate some either reality or some sort of fantastical interpretation of a fictional reality. Okay? And Pathologic really does that. Essentially, Pathologic takes place in this town where you are one of the only doctors, and a plague starts sweeping through. Now, the town was not doing great before the plague because there's a war going on. It doesn't really say what. It's sort of visually implied that it's kind of like the First World War. But they also have technology that shouldn't have existed around that time, so it's like in a Twilight Zone type world. And there's these weird creatures and aliens and stuff like, not aliens, but these weird creatures all over town and things like that, and really, really creepy imagery. But the game isn't really about horror, it's about being unsettling and disturbing. And so, there's not a lot of food. Resources are scarce. Not that many things are being shipped into town. Most people fish through the trash to find little trinkets to trade for like stale crackers and stuff like that. It's that kind of like barely scraping by existence that the town lives in prior to the plague. And then once the plague hits, entire sections of the city are going to be cordoned off, and you won't be able to go into them. And if you do, you're going to be chased by clouds of plague, which could end up infecting you. And then you have to try and treat people, and the resources for treating people are very, very hard to come by, very expensive. They take a lot of time to synthesize medications for. So basically, your job in the game is to try and treat as many people as possible while simultaneously trying to find a cure for the infection. And I'm most of the way through too, and I haven't even started trying to find a cure for the infection. And I don't know if it's because I have already missed out on crucial things and I'm just never going to, or if it's because I just haven't hit the story beats yet that allow me to start doing things like that. But and the game is open-ended, and that's why I said, like, you play it the way you can, not how you want to play. It is such a desperate situation, just doing whatever you can. So part of the inventiveness and the problem-solving and unique solutions of this game are just trying to figure out how the hell to, okay, how can I go and synthesize medicine and get it to this person in time before they probably die at the end of the day. Also, I probably want to do this stuff before nighttime hits, because then all the bandits are going to be out and I'm going to have to get into fucking scalpel knife fights with crazy bandits in the middle of the night. It technically has guns and first-person shooter elements. I still have not found one gun in the entire game. I'm almost done with it, and I don't think I'll ever be able to afford a gun the entire game. In fact, I have some ammo, and I'm really thinking about just trading it because it's basically worthless to me. And best thing I can do is just try and avoid combat and either stealth through or just kill as many people as I can if they get in my way. And in addition to that, it has for immersive elements and sort of simulation elements, it has I guess what you might call survival gameplay elements. You have to drink water. You have to sleep. The town is pretty big, so there's a lot of commuting, and if you run too much, your stamina gets low. And if you let your meters fall too much, they start influencing all your other meters. So if you don't sleep enough, it starts influencing max health, max stamina, max thirst, and things like that. And things like the water supply in town, there's spigots everywhere, but sometimes the water supply will be infected. So then you've got to store up empty bottles and fill them with water before the spigot becomes infected. But then after you have water bottles full of water, you're going to need some of those to synthesize medicines, and then sometimes you need to give water to people who are sick or people who need something from you. In addition to that, currency in the game is in a state of hyperinflation. And it's still rare for you for some reason, but it's in hyperinflation. So lots and lots of currency will buy you very little. So what you have to do, as Mandalore Gaming sort of coined it in his review of Pathologic, you have to partake in the hobo economy, which means you need to constantly be searching corpses, trash cans, boxes for anything. And the best place to trade is with the children in the town, and they'll usually have things like knives, ammunition, guns, medicine, soap, sometimes food. Food is very rare, and it's hard to keep yourself fed. In addition to that, the game world and the storytelling and even most conversations you have with people are extremely obtuse and vague, so you don't really know what the hell's going on ever. You don't have a clear idea of what your objectives are. You don't have a clear idea if going down a story path and wasting tons and time and resources on it is going to lead to anything. The game has its own day-night cycle and its own time frame. So this many minutes equals this many hours in game. You see what I'm saying? And you only have 12 or 14 days to deal with the epidemic and find a cure and try and save as many people as possible. And time just keeps ticking no matter what you're doing. So it's an incredibly, I don't want to say it's intense because I'm actually somewhat chilled out playing the game, but it is a arduous, tough experience, and it's not about solving problems in a unique way because it will be fun. It's about solving problems in a unique way because that's all you have. And that's actually more true to life. Sometimes, like necessity is the mother of invention, and you just have to get through things in whatever way you can. So Pathologic is a really great experience for doing that. It's a great experience for just, it's a survival game in a city, in a town full of people and shops, where you have to avoid getting infected. You have to treat people. You have to find enough extra resources to produce medicine for them when it's already hard enough finding enough resources to feed yourself and take care of your own self. You might not even have proper clothing through most of the game. As the infection spreads more and more, there are fewer and fewer people. So not only do commutes become more difficult because you can't go through, or it's difficult to go through certain sections of the city, but also there's fewer people, like children and stuff like that, out to be able to trade with to get things that you need. Because sometimes children are the best way to get medicines that are difficult to synthesize, because for some reason they just find this stuff everywhere. So it's an incredibly sort of difficult experience, but in the best way possible, because sometimes you just want to have that experience of like, wow, everything is tough. Everything is like, it seems like an impossible situation. And the other thing that's really great about the game is it doesn't have an ending because you trigger a story thing. It has an ending because you run out of time. So you've either done some of the things you need to do in that time frame, or you haven't. And that's all there is to it. The game will just end at the end, and you will get an ending based on what you were able to do. And if you weren't able to do much, I guess that's the bad ending, but the game does end and you can sort of finish it as long as you just keep yourself alive. And of course, it does benefit on multiple playthroughs, but it's not a game you're going to want to pick up right away again. I have heard some people on forums say, like, after they beat it once or twice, on the third playthrough, they're actually able to get, like, the best ending, never be low on resources, and save everybody. But also, I'm playing on the recommended difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty of the game. So I might be tempted to try it again, just to see more story elements on an easier difficulty. But I'm trying to go for the experience right now. So it's great for that experience. It is an immersive experience. It's a highly simulated world. There aren't a ton of things like physics objects and stuff like that in it, but it's simulated in the sense that, like, you have to avoid infection. You have to avoid, getting mugged and stuff like that in the streets by people, and none of it is scripted. There's very little scripting in the game. You have to constantly manage your own stats. You have to sleep. You have to eat. Everything that you do in the world it's not easily sort of streamlined. Like, you have to collect all the ingredients for all your medications and things like that, and they're difficult to come by. There's item and weapon degradation, so you constantly have to be thinking about, okay, maybe I find some sewing needles or something like that to repair my stuff. You can expand the size of your inventory. Once again, it's got a grid-based inventory system where, size and weight determines how many grid squares it takes up, and you have to play a little bit game of Tetris just to be able to fit stuff in your inventory. You can expand your inventory. There's no skill trees in the game, which for some reason I thought there was going to be. There's no skill trees in the game. You just start the game. And there are 3 different playable characters which will have different things that they're good or bad at the start of the game, or have foreknowledge about certain things that will help you in certain quests or with certain dialogue things. There are dialogue trees. It's hard to tell if they matter or not because, like I said, the conversations are so vague, and it's like everyone is a beat poet, because it's just vague and symbolism and imagery and just weirdness, and it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to know where certain quest lines will go because of that vagary. And there's a lot of supernatural elements to the game. So, but it definitely qualifies as an immersive sim. It's trying to simulate this world, heavily immerse you in it, and create an experience, and it all happens in real time as far as the game is concerned, right? There's never a period, unless you're asleep, there's never a period of time where you're not playing the game, where things aren't changing in the game world, and that is another aspect of simulation. People are getting sicker, the plague is moving, and a lot of these things are not scripted either. A lot of these things are randomized. Which districts will be infected is randomized, and you can change the stats of how easy it might be to reinfect by treating people, by administering prophylaxis to certain patients and things like that to prevent more people from getting sick and spreading the disease. So, yeah, and also there's reputation things. So if you trade at a loss with certain people, you can get a reputation. If you cure people in a certain district, you can get a higher reputation. That means people will give you better prices. They might actually aid you in combat against bandits and stuff like that. Where bandits show up is usually randomized. What kind of so sometimes you have to do surgery on bodies to get organs to use in medical research, and what kind of organs you get is very randomized. So it's all this like simulated There's some RPG elements in terms of like, yeah, that random like, okay, I'm going to cut this guy open. Am I going to accidentally, sever the wrong artery or destroy part of the organ tissue and not be able to salvage it? So, yeah, it's an incredibly interesting experience. I'll definitely be doing a full review, so I think it totally qualifies as an immersive sim, and I think this is why I like this list. This is where this list starts to kind of get out of the sort of comfort zone of what people think of as immersive sims and get into applying the definition to other types of games. Next one on the list is Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. I have talked about the Elder Scrolls a lot on here already, but I think Oblivion, for me, I thought it was a little bit more immersive than something like Morrowind, and I think it preserves a lot of the core Elder Scrolls stuff. You still have many different like weapon specializations like short sword, long sword, axe, things like that. You can't just be like, oh, bladed weapons, I'm good with those. You have to specialize with what kind of, sword you're into or what kind of weapons you're into. The magical crafting system allows you to craft your own spells and make your own spells, which added a kind of an interesting level of depth to the game. In addition to that, having to sleep to level up, and they were more keeping yourself in more of a third-person or first-person perspective for most of the game, and having certain animations be triggered when you do certain things. I don't know. It felt a little bit more immersive than something like Morrowind for some of the aspects they added to the game. I think it was the last time a Elder Scrolls game was really in that sort of immersive sim territory, and I think in some ways it did sort of go back to its roots a little bit. Everything, it's got day-night cycles, you have to sleep, you have to eat, inventory management, all of that stuff, but heavily stat-based RPG. Pick a class, pick your stats, whatever. And yeah, there's not a ton I can say about this game that I haven't said about the other Elder Scrolls games, but I think it was the last real outing for Bethesda where they were still sort of sticking with that, heavy inspiration from Ultima Underworld. But then this is also them doing their own thing, and I think it was a good sort of compromise between sort of modern sensibilities in gaming and, sort of the traditions of RPGs that it came from. But you could honestly be forgiven for removing pretty much everything but Daggerfall and maybe Arena from this list in terms of immersive sims, because once again, they're not really going for that, like, okay, we want this highly immersive experience, we want you to feel completely in the game world, although Oblivion does a fairly good job of that, and it's not really all about like tons of player choice, although once again, Oblivion does a pretty good job of that. But they don't have entirely the same design philosophy, so you could be forgiven for wanting to remove them from this list. Like, for example, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 I would not necessarily consider immersive sims, and we're going to get to that. Well, yeah, so Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion makes it on this list, and for me, it would kind of be like halfway in, halfway out. Same thing with Morrowind, but I would probably put Daggerfall in there because it has so much content to it and so much customization for what you can do in the world. So it's really just trying to be like, here's a world, be whoever you want to be in it. Now, here we're getting into Dark Messiah and Might and Magic. I would say this is very much an immersive sim light, and this is really what Arcane has gotten good at. I think their first outing with Arx Fatalis was really keeping with the core design philosophy of an immersive sim, much like the original Ultima Underworld kind of, established. But Dark Messiah of Might and Magic really showcases more of, I think, how Arcane has become a little bit, and they've kind of gone down that sort of path of like player choice. But even more so, I think, a lot of people, like I said, I don't like characterizing immersive sims by this idea that it's just about having game systems to allow for tons of unique styles of play or tons of unique styles of problem solving. I think that's a result of the core design philosophy. I don't think it is the design philosophy. And so we'll get to this with some of the other Arcane games. I feel like for Arcane games, they approach making immersive sims from, okay, we just want the player to be able to do this in this way, do this in this way, have this ability, this ability, this ability, this ability. I feel like they build the abilities first and then the level design to accommodate the abilities, and then don't really necessarily focus on trying to make a really immersive, sort of real feeling place, necessarily. That's not to say that they don't make immersive sims. I'm just saying that I always get this feeling playing their games that they're coming from it from that perspective. And this would, of course, also be down that path of just tons of player choice, kind of like Deus Ex and stuff. So like I said, there's the two different paths of the immersive sim. And Dark Messiah of Might and Magic is definitely down that player choice path, and it is more of an immersive sim light. It is a somewhat linear experience. It's not like Underworld where you can sort of like explore and, you know, there's like towns and settlements and things like that. It is pretty much just one battle arena from one place to the next. And I think the reason it makes it on this list and why a lot of people consider it an immersive sim is, first of all, that's what Arcane does. That's their bread and butter. They love immersive sims, and that's what they like to make. And also because I think it was originally supposed to be another Underworld game. It was supposed to be Arx Fatalis 2, but then they got the Dark Messiah license sort of thrust on them by Ubisoft, and then on top of that, I think there was pressure to make it more linear and arcadey. Now, it's linear just in the sense that like the game just like progresses from one area to the next. It's just kind of like you keep running and going. But the reason it's an immersive sim is because there are so many highly simulated systems, like using Half-Life 2's physics system, like all of the spells and things like that, all of the objects in the world that can be used to kill people, like, you know, swinging chandeliers by shooting out one of the supports, throwing a patch of ice down on the ground, having the enemies come chase after you and then slip on the ice and fall off. I mean, much like Arcane, what they've shown off in recent years, I think it really showcases what is possible in immersive sims. When you have a lot of systems that you're simulating and then you just let them go to work, I think it really showcases what is possible and what can be fun about immersive sims, but doesn't quite live up to the original intention, which is just to, yes, you have lots of simulated interesting systems that can interact with each other and create emergent gameplay for the player, but it's also about making a super believable game world. And Dark Messiah is not like, you don't feel like you're in that game world, but it is fun to play with all these systems. So that's why I'd say it's very much an immersive sim light. But it is a incredible game and an incredible achievement nonetheless, and I think it really showcases what Arcane is best at, which is basically like setting up this it's not, I was about to say it's setting up like a Rube Goldberg machine, but a Rube Goldberg machine is a logical series of events that leads from one to the other. It's more like, I can't really think of a good analogy, but it's more like setting up all these discrete systems that can interact with each other and just sort of putting them on the battlefield and just saying, all right, go. And then it's just chaos, but like the best kind of chaos. And you can do things in Arcane games that you never would think you could get away with. And as much as I love Looking Glass, Arcane has been able to achieve games where you can do stuff that I don't even think Looking Glass ever made games where you could do that level of, you could perform those level of actions at a level of control and have that much fun playing with all these systems. So that's Arcane is really, really good at. But I don't always feel super engrossed or immersed or absorbed by their game worlds as I did by Looking Glass. So it's kind of like the issue with Arcane. But Dark Messiah and Might and Magic really showed off their talent for just making awesome non-scripted simulation systems in games. So the next game is S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Shadow of Chernobyl, and I think this sort of encompasses the entire S.T.A.L.K.E.R. series. This is, again, more down the road of, this is going back to, you know, this is, instead of being like, oh, player expression and fun, which, you know, that's sort of the Dark Messiah and Masquerade Bloodlines and games like that approach to immersive sim design. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is much more about the, okay, let's make a highly immersive experience in a highly simulated game world so that the player really feels like it's totally real. And it is also in league with Pathologic as being a game that is arguably not fun. It can be fun or enjoyable to roleplay as someone living in this, like, you know, sort of irradiated wasteland with all these like dangerous mutants and you know, bandit-like factions that will kill you and then strip everything you own off of you and stuff like that. That can be enjoyable to roleplay being in that kind of situation, but it's not like fun because it can be very frustrating and it's difficult and it's arduous. S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl does a really, really good job of making a sort of tough survival simulation. And there's a lot of immersive elements to the game world. You can sit down by the fire and eat something and have some companionship and swap stories with some other stalkers. You have things like weapon inaccuracy. I think there might even be weapon jamming in the game, which is trying to simulate sort of reality, like the reality of using like these old, you know, Cold War era weapons, you know, in these harsh environment and things like that. Simulation of environmental hazards like tons of rain, like radiation, things like that. A simulation of a real lawless land because virtually anyone you run across can be killed. And in fact, I remember I was doing one story mission and I was talking to one of the leaders of this group and he was about to send me on another story mission, and then all of a sudden we got raided by these guys had gotten to a firefight with earlier. I thought that the AI would stop following me at some point, but that's not how the simulation works. If they want to keep following you, they will. And they got in, and I think the leader got killed, so we went into the firefight. I came back to try and find the leader to get him to finish telling me about the quest, and he was killed. But the cool thing is that a lot of these things are sort of randomized in the game, so when I reloaded a save and I sort of circumnavigated the guys that I got into the fight with, I was able to go there. But here's the thing, in a normal game, where I was like a stronghold. It was like a base. And when you go into a base like in Fallout or something like that, the base is constant, you know. Nobody dies there. Everything stays the same, you know. No matter how many enemies are outside, nobody inside that's important or story relevant is going to get killed. Well, in this game, that's not the case. A base doesn't really mean anything. If the enemy has overwhelming fire superiority or overwhelming numbers, they're going to kill everyone in that base. That's what's sort of interesting about S.T.A.L.K.E.R. I'm trying to remember if there's skill trees like an RPG. I think there is. I think you have to like go into like weapon skills and stuff like that to improve your accuracy with weapons and all these things. And like I said, there's weapon degradation. There's terrible weapon spread and stuff like that if your skill's not high enough or if your weapon's in terrible condition. It's also it's a game about scarcity, a lot like Pathologic. Ammo is very scarce, resources are scarce, it's difficult to heal, it's difficult to find enough ammo to be effective in combat, and yet the game keeps asking of you to do tougher and tougher things. They'll put more enemies in front of you, they'll have you go investigate sewers to fight mutants to get these artifacts and things like that. And it's got, I believe it has a dynamic weather system, it's got a day-night cycle. The AI is completely, not randomized, but it's completely simulated and not scripted at all. So there's not a lot of AI scripting. There's not a lot of scripting for basically anything. It is all high-end simulation, just like, yeah, you set up the simulation and you just let it run, you know? And it is a very immersive experience, too, because of those things, because you have to manage, like, hunger and thirst and you know, your level of radiation, and you have to keep different medications on hand, and you have to worry about weapon degradation, and you have to worry about if you're being followed by like a band of bandits who all have, you know, automatic weapons, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to bring them to the settlement I'm going to. I don't think you have to sleep. I don't remember if you can sleep or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the game, but you know, yeah, so S.T.A.L.K.E.R Shadow of Chernobyl is, again, showcases that this sort of philosophy is again, there are games that aren't Looking Glass games or not even Ion Storm games that are more in keeping with the original sort of Looking Glass design philosophy for immersive sims that were not made by them and usually aren't even talked about as immersive sims. And I think S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a really good example because You compare it to something like Fallout, there's tons of scripting in Fallout. There is some simulation, some randomization, but there's tons of scripting, and certain people are only going to be in certain places, and you turn in certain quests, and then this happens. Whereas Stalker is just like sort of free form. It makes the world feel incredibly real, and the game actually kind of sucks to play, at least mechanically. The shooting is pretty awful. It's very buggy. It crashes a lot. So you got to wonder, like, what keeps people playing a game like this. If it has all these sort of mechanical and technical problems, it's because it's an experience that you can't quite get anywhere else, much like Pathologic. So it keeps people playing that game. And I think immersive sim design philosophy really helps create experiences that make people feel like they're there, and creates an experience that's enjoyable and like nothing that they're going to get from other games. You know, Fallout doesn't have the same level of desperation as something like Stalker, because there are enough constants in the game that you don't have to worry about certain things, and scarcity becomes less of an issue as the game goes on, and you have to worry about weapon degradation, but past a certain point it's not a big issue and things like that. But Stalker is definitely a game that really doesn't have those constants, and it really is just, it feels more real than something like Fallout, because you're like, wow, like, you know, anything can happen. Moving on, we have BioShock. Once again, one of the things that's commonly listed as immersive sims, although I would also call this an immersive sim light almost. Compared to System Shock 2, well, I don't know, let's discuss it a little bit. So BioShock carries in some of the RPG elements from System Shock, but essentially, instead of having to pick a class or something like that, you just pick a few of the powers that you want to upgrade, and actually, depending on how you play the game, you might actually be able to get most of the upgrades for your characters. You don't necessarily have to go with a build. It does have some holdovers from System Shock, like certain passive buffs and things like that you can splice into yourself, and some holdovers from the original System Shock as well, like being able to go with sort of a melee build. The interesting thing about Ken Levine and the BioShock series is they're always trying to pay homage to things like doing a melee build and things like that were possible in System Shock 1 and 2, but they're just not really, even with all of the wrench passive buffs and things like that, it's probably not really viable to play as a melee build character, and there aren't really builds in BioShock either. You can specialize a little bit more in hacking and things like that, but I don't know. The gameplay does sort of devolve into being a little bit more of a jack of all trades for most playthroughs. Unless you're playing on the hardest difficulty, and maybe it's like your first time where you don't know where like tons of stuff is, or what powers are going to be most useful or things like that, maybe then you might have to stick with sort of a build, or stick with just a few powers and a few gene tonics that seem to work for your playstyle. But I have usually found that I can do pretty much everything I want. I can go full frontal combat. I can go hack everything I want. I can use plasmids most of the time if I want to. I can go stealthily sort of if I want to. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you don't really have to specialize. In terms of being an immersive simulation, it is a fairly immersive game world. It does the smart thing that the System Shock franchise did, is that in sort of Underworld as well, and that sort of each level of Rapture, or each place in Rapture, is like a level in the dungeon, or it's like a deck on one of the ships in the System Shock franchise. And they're like mini open worlds, but there is a lot more scripting than, say, like System Shock 1 or 2. You can only do things in certain orders necessarily. It does open up a little bit more as you get to places like Fort Frolic, as you get to places like Olympia Heights and things like that. But places like Hephaestus, you kind of have to do in the order that the game prescribes. And the early level, I know they're trying to teach you all the gameplay mechanics, but like the medical pavilion, you kind of have to do everything the way that the game prescribes. So it does feel a little bit more linear than like System Shock 2 or System Shock 1. I think where the immersive sim aspects come in are the fact that there's, as Ken Levine sort of described it, there's sort of an ecosystem to BioShock. And so Fort Frolic is probably the best level in the game to showcase, like, okay, these are the immersive sim elements. Like, the Big Daddies are doing their thing, the Splicers are doing their thing, and this is all the systemic sort of portion of the gameplay, and you can create totally different emergent gameplay scenarios by how you choose to start combat, how you choose to prioritize enemies and things like that, and where you choose to go. You can set up traps using different tools. You can use your plasmids to do certain things with enemies, like turn them in against each other or call a Big Daddy into combat, and all of these things are, again, simulated and not scripted. So I think one of the reasons BioShock gets a pass from a lot of people is because it doesn't rely on a lot of scripting. Most of the game's combat areas are just sort of open-ended simulated systems, the different AI systems, the different combat systems, and things like that. And there's a lot of different things that you can do that sort of make sense in the context of the game world, because, like, for example, hacking involves doing this little goo puzzle where you have to redirect the goo flowing through these machines. So if you shoot ice at the machines, which you wouldn't necessarily think to do, I think the game gives you a hint, I wish it didn't, but if you shoot ice at the machines, it'll actually increase the viscosity of the goo and slow the rate of flow, so you can have more time to do the hacking. Another thing that BioShock really does well, that is sort of immersive sim territory and similar to System Shock 2, is there's a lot of different ways to accomplish what you need. Even opening a safe, you don't have a lockpick, who cares? You can buy out the safe, or you can hack it, and if you can't do one thing the way that you want to, there's typically another way that you can do it. Although I was a little bit disappointed. There was one puzzle. There was this guy behind this electrified fence, and the electricity was hooked up to like a battery or something like that, and so I couldn't touch the fence to try and put in the combination to get it open. So I was like, oh, why don't I use telekinesis to lift the battery up or something like that? And you couldn't. And so the game does allow you to do things like use telekinesis to do interesting stuff, like press buttons that you can't reach, or grab stuff that you couldn't normally reach, or bypass certain doors and things like that. But it's not consistent with its rules. There's really no reason I shouldn't have been able to pick up the battery and disconnect it from the switch. Other than that, the way you're supposed to do it is find a hidden door and come around the back and take it apart that way, if I'm remembering correctly. But there is, everything is a physics object. That's definitely sort of part of the immersive sim aspect of it, and you can pick up anything you want, Half-Life 2 style, and hurl it at people, and use telekinesis, and can use all sorts of plasmids and powers on the splicers in the game. You can use them on the Big Daddy. You can set up traps for the Big Daddy. You can lure people into areas where you have hacked turrets. And actually, so one of the ways that it's sort of fun as an immersive sim, the last time I played, I was playing on a really hard difficulty, and I forgot how tough Big Daddies are on the higher difficulties. So I hacked a bunch of turrets in this area, and the Big Daddy just didn't want to come. So what was it? I kept enraging splicers. And in Enrage, they will come after you as well. So I would enrage them, and then I would show my face and then duck behind something. And they would come running after me, but then they would also be shooting at because they have interesting AI. They'll turn and start shooting at whatever. And so basically they were luring the Big Daddy over to the area for me, and then everyone was getting caught in the sort of the kill box I'd set up between 3 hacked turrets. And then, I barely had to expend any ammo on the Big Daddy, and I was like, okay, this is when BioShock is working as an immersive sim, because I was able to set up a plan of attack, think through the problem, and let the systems go to work to do what I wanted. So it's definitely, I'd say, yeah, definitely an immersive sim. It can be a fairly immersive world to get dropped into, because you can interact with most objects. You can drink all the liquor in there and you actually get drunk. You can interact with slot machines and payphones and record players and TVs and everything like that, and everything's a physics object, and there's lots of systems in the game, and I would say it is more of that kind of creating a highly simulated game world to give you sort of make you believe that you're there. It is closer to that than just purely about player choice, because much like most of the Shock series, there's this idea of scarcity sort of driving gameplay. So scarcity is not necessarily just about like give the player, let them do whatever they want, you know, kind of like your Deus Exes and stuff like that. It's more about like, well, how can you set this up? What's the best way to set this up to save resources? It may not be the most fun way, but it can be gratifying to do things in a clever way, and that's what BioShock is sort of good at. The things that are sort of disappointing is the removal of any and all inventory. Well, not all inventory. You can stock up on EVE hypos and med kits like you could in System Shock 2, but that's it. And it's really frustrating too, because when you want to eat food items in the game world, you just consume them the minute you pick them up. And this is not great. You know, a real true immersive sim would have a real honest to God inventory, and you could stock up on food if you wanted to, and then eat the food at your leisure. Thankfully, the levels are mostly fairly small-ish, or it doesn't take long to traverse through them. So if you need food for health, you can go back to an area where you're like, I saw like a whole turkey dinner you in that room over there. I'm going to go eat it now. The other thing I like that's sort of interesting, sort of an immersive sim aspect, is there's consumables like cigarettes and liquor and food. Food gives you health. Cigarettes give you Eve but no health, and then liquor gives you health, or they give you Eve but they take away health, and then liquor gives you health but takes away Eve. And on the higher difficulties, the scarcity drives the ability to, you know, or it drives you making decisions like, well, you know what, I probably am going to smoke these cigarettes because I need my offensive plasmids right now more than I need that extra little sliver of health. There's also a crafting mechanic in the game where you can craft things like lockpicks, you can craft, I think, different kinds of bombs and stuff like that. I think you can craft ammo, so you can craft specialty ammo. So again, you know, picking up junk and finding things like that is really necessary. So you have an inventory, but it's under the hood and you don't have a ton of control over it. And especially for things like food items, it gets a little annoying. It's not enough of a sin for you to be like, well, it's not an immersive sim anymore. But it's getting close. It's very close. And it definitely kind of built a roadmap to show us like, hey, this is where BioShock Infinite's going to go. It's dumbing down of the things that people loved about the original game. But yeah, I think BioShock is really a great immersive sim, and adding the sort of, it's one of the better first-person shooter RPG hybrids because it plays really well. It is not as immersive because of some design choices in the gameplay and some goofiness with the UI and things like that, but it is still fairly immersive, and it's a really awesome game. It's a really fun game world. I know Warren Spector said he doesn't really consider it an immersive sim, but I think it's a lot closer than most games. Even if you're going to be really, really a stickler about which ones you consider yes or no, I think it's a lot closer than most games that pretend to be like moving on. This is a contentious one, but it's one that I absolutely feel needs to be on the list, which is Far Cry 2. Far Cry 2 is such an amazing game. It's one of those games that's just constantly scratching at the back of my head. I'm like, oh yeah, I should play Far Cry 2 some more. You know, I basically am constantly in the middle of a playthrough of Far Cry 2. I am always halfway through a playthrough, or 3/4 of a way, or 80%, or 1/4 of the way. Basically, it's one of the games that I just like to pick up and play. Pretty much playing it all year round, like once, I don't know, every 2 weeks, once a month, I'll play it for a couple of hours or more. Sometimes I'll get really into it and play it, you know, more consistently, but it is an amazing game. And I remember when it came out, all these other shooters like Call of Duty and stuff like that, like, yeah, they were trying to add more realistic elements, like having to aim down iron sights and stuff like that, but they were also, you know, smearing your screen with red jelly when you got hit, and then it would just dissipate. And they were extremely linear affairs and kind of like boring by comparison. And then there were shooters like Halo, which were very simplified and sort of dumbed down. And then something like Far Cry 2 comes out, and kind of the other interesting thing about Far Cry 2 is it's a game that my buddy showed off to me at his apartment one time when it came out, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's just like, yeah, you can like fix your car, and you have like malaria. And he's like, oh, you can't go out in the desert because you'll get dehydrated and you'll die. and he was like, yeah, your weapons jam, and you have to like clear the jam before you can keep firing, and he's like, your weapons will break if you go too long without cleaning them or getting new ones. And he's like, yeah, and then there's like you can sleep and change the time of day, and he's like, yeah, there's all this cool stuff you can do, man, it's totally dope. And then of course obviously the fire system. And so I liked what I was seeing at his house, but then when I got the game, I just hated it the first time I played it. I hated it. I was like, the map is too hard to read. I have no idea where I'm going, because I was so used to like a waypoint. They're just like, go here. Here's the arrow, just go. In Far Cry 2, it's a physical map that you have to read, and while your little dot does show you generally where you are on the map, for a newcomer, it's incredibly difficult to read, and you really have no idea where you're going. Of course, the map doesn't change its direction based on where you're going. It is static. It's just, this is the map, and the only thing that changes is your little dot on it. And you can't go into a screen and look at the map and take some time. The map is open while the world is happening around you, because that's how it is in reality. So if you want to look at the map while driving or something like that, well, you've got to have like one hand on the wheel, one eye on the wheel, and one eye on the map to try and read it at the same time. And it also means that you can't just, like GTA or something like that, you can't just follow the little mini map in the corner. It just constantly tells you where to go, which can mean that you're spending most of the game just looking at the mini map. In this game, you have to be like, all right, I'm going to take 2 lefts and a right, And then you start learning that like the little arrows on the signs will kind of give you a hint, like maybe you should take a left here and things like that. And then you start just learning the game world. Like you just know routes to take when you're driving to get to certain places. And so I really hated the game at first, and I hated I thought the weapon jamming was cool, but it was becoming annoying, and I thought the malaria was bullshit, because I'm just like, I'm always out of meds, and this sucks. And and then I remember I was about to take it. We have a used bookstore where I'm from that it's great. It's where I buy and trade most of my stuff. And I was like, well, I'll probably take it in soon, but I think I got sick that summer or something like that, or it hurt my foot or something like that, so I was sort of couch ridden for a little while, and I was like, all right, I'll give it another shot, because it was like the only game I hadn't played to death on my 360. And after some fiddling and just learning the mechanics, all of a sudden it clicked, and I was like, this game is amazing. And I played it obsessively for the next like 4 or 5 days until I finished it, and then it just became a game that I play. I play, like I said, I'm always working on a playthrough of it. It's just kind of the game that it's like almost a chill out game for me. I always kind of have it going on. Like if I just need to chill out and just play something not mindless, but just fun, I'll put on Far Cry 2. Now, the thing about Far Cry 2 is that it's kind of the only Far Cry game in the series. They all have like heavy influence from immersive sims, but it's the only one in the actual series that really meets sort of the design criteria for an immersive sim. The others do too many things that sort of like take you out of the experience, or remove features, or remove immersive elements. And the thing I love about Far Cry 2 is you're pretty much never out of the perspective of your character. The only time you're in the menu is to possibly save the game. And even saving the game is like a physical thing. It's like these little boxes you find on walls, and you have to go over to them and save if you want to save. And it's also right next to where you restock your medical stuff. It's a first aid kit you find on the wall. It's a game where if you sprint for too long in the intense African heat while you're sick with malaria, your vision will get blurry and you'll have to stop and take a breather for a few seconds. It's a game where you are sick with malaria and you need to keep stocked up on malaria pills, otherwise you'll pass out and wind up God knows where. It's a game where your weapons will degrade over time. It's a mainstream first-person shooter in the Far Cry franchise where your weapons will degrade over time, and not only can they be completely destroyed, but they will start jamming all the time, the dirtier and cruddier they get. And they will jam at the most inopportune moments, and you cannot do anything until you clear the jam. And this is definitely, someone who's a bit of a gun, not fanatic, but I do a lot of shooting and I have many guns. This happens in real life, more than you would think. You get jams, and if you're going to start shooting, you got to learn how to clear jams. That's all there is to it, because they're going to happen. And if you're a mercenary in the middle of Africa using Cold War era or earlier weapons that are in varying states of disrepair, you can bet your ass that you're going to have to be clearing jams from time to time. Even in the sort of venerated AK, you're going to have to clear jams from time to time. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a game ever have a jam clearing mechanic, and I'm like, wow, this is so, like, it's trying to be so realistic. Another thing I love is that if your vehicle gets shot up, you have to pull over to the side of the road, pop the hood, and start repairing stuff. Now, the more you play it and the more you learn about how to do these things in real life, it is a little silly. First of all, most of the jam clearing is not how you would do it, but whatever, I can forgive that one. But like repairing the car, you're literally turning a bolt on top of the radiator. So if you take a 50 cal through the engine block, that'll certainly fix it. Just turn the bolt on top of the radiator, which doesn't even exist. But that's not the point. The point is that you're sort of simulating, like, okay, I got to pull over to the side of the road, and with my little dinky wrench, got to try and like patch this up just enough so I can get back on the road and make it to the next little outpost, so I can like resupply or something like that. And it's that kind of intense feeling. And also I love that they're like, all of the cars are like these old rickety trucks that are kind of like fucked up, and and very, very simple engine mechanics in the bay inside and stuff like that. And like I said, sleeping to change the time of day, and it's got a really long day-night cycle. Like, it's daytime for a long time, and then it's nighttime for a long time. So it feels like actual whole days. It's not games where it's like 20 minutes go by and the sun's already setting, You heal yourself with these stearets of morphine, but if you run out of those, what you have to actually do is like wrap up a burn on your hand, or literally take some pliers and pull the bullet out and stuff like that. And yeah, while the animations are happening, and I think for me it can be more immersive if there's an animation like that. It can be sometimes. I do understand the argument that it's like, well, it's taking control away from the player, so yeah, whatever. But it felt more immersive to me, and more of like a simulation. Like, okay, it's like you're simulating being just some random, rando mercenary out in some third world African country getting shot at by, People's Liberation Army or whatever. Or People's Liberation Front, or whatever the names they come up with. And I think that the names in the game are very much like that anyways, for the different factions. And it's just such an amazing experience. It's so I get totally engrossed and enveloped in the world, and I feel like I'm there. And there's so many aspects that are trying to, not only does the game have a lot of simulations that it's running to make the game world feel believable, but it is also trying to simulate what it would be like to be in that environment and with doing the things that you're doing in the game. It's very likely that you would have contracted some sort of disease, and you're going to need pills to keep yourself from getting sick. It's very likely that you're going to have weapon jams. It's very likely that you're going to need to stop to repair old, rickety, sort of held together with baling wire vehicles. Also, the type of vehicles they chose, I don't know if you've been, I live part-time in a third world country, and yeah, a lot of the cars that you'll see, I mean, like in the States, most people, when they want to drive off-road, they will get a sport utility vehicle, usually with four-wheel drive, or at least something that just has some decent ground clearance. In third world countries, they drive whatever they can, so they will go on roads that you wouldn't take your Jeep on in like a little Geo Metro, And so you'll actually drive some of those around in the game, and they do other things in the game that are just perfect, like driving around in one of those cars and you can just hear things rattling. You just hear like ding, 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 like you feel like the whole car is shaking. You hear screws rattling loose. And that's another thing too. I used to work a field job, helping with land surveying and things like that. And I used to have to drive this truck and literally off-road. There are no roads. I'm just driving it through straight, desert or prairie or whatever. And even on the roads, those cars would be, shaking themselves to death practically. And that whole summer working, it felt a lot like Far Cry 2. This was before I'd even played Far Cry 2, but working largely by myself sometimes, driving out to random GPS locations, taking readings or doing whatever, or recording data, and then just driving the vehicle even further and stuff like that. then playing a game like Far Cry 2, I was like, wow, with the sound design, with the type of vehicles, with the fact that even things like your dashboard will start gradually getting dustier and dustier and dustier the more you drive. All of these elements really sell the realism of what they're trying to do and really help you simulate, okay, what it would be like to be living in this situation. Now, when you go too far out in the desert, you start getting like, your vision starts getting blurry, you start getting heat stroke, and it's sort of a brilliant way to put boundaries to the map without giving you an invisible wall or an unclimbable mountain range. Just the sounds of the savannah and things like that, and the look, the graphics are amazing. Also, there are a ton of physics objects and destructible items in the world, way more than any other Far Cry game. They actually started removing features as Far Cry went on. There's a dynamic weather system, so it'll just rain randomly. And of course, the big one is the fire propagation system. It also has really good AI, So for example, if you shoot someone and you don't kill them, what they'll do is they'll limp over to a place and find cover, and they'll wait for you to come finish them off. And then they'll be usually waiting for you with a sidearm out and usually get the drop on you. Enemies will huddle together in shade during hot parts of the day, and they'll spread out more at night. Enemies from campsites that are close by will hear and come to investigate you. I think there's other things going on with the AI too, some really advanced AI sort of simulation where they have a pretty large degree of self-preservation, and they do a lot of, they try and flank you a lot, they try and find cover, they try and, things like that. And even they will start using things like Molotovs and stuff like that to flush you out. But then, of course, you can use the fire propagation system because it's the savannah, these really dry grasslands. You can throw Molotov cocktails out or use the flamethrower, and these brush fires will sweep quickly, like they do in real life, towards the enemy. And one of the great things you can do in the game is you can start herding the enemy across the battlefield into certain places, or you can flush them out. Sometimes, like if you're a sniper and you shoot, everyone will just go into cover and hide behind buildings. They won't rush your position, and they won't keep popping up to take pot shots unless they are pretty sure they're safe. They will constantly stay in cover till they know what's going on. So one thing you can do is throw Molotovs to sort of flush them out and get them out in the open again. And you can really control the engagement a lot by just, sort of hurting the enemy in certain places. Like all these great simulation aspects. So if anyone wants to fight me on this, I just don't see how you could. It really is sort of going to the design philosophy of an immersive sim. There are very few elements that try and take you out of the game world. The HUD disappears for most of the time. The only time the HUD shows up was when you really need it to let you know, like, okay, you got this much ammo left. This is your health. It's only in combat. Every other time, there's no HUD. There's not even a crosshair most of the time. So it's just, and it's this open world that just kind of lets you they just drop you into the world, and they just say, like, you can go pick up missions if you want, you can just go drive around and go to outposts and shoot people if you want, you can pick whatever kind of vehicles you have access to. I also like that they try and keep it as non-gamey as possible. The only way you can fast travel is to literally drive or walk to bus stations and then charter a bus to another bus stop. The only way you can save on at least the console version is to find safe houses and sleep and save there, So it requires you to sort of have like this whole lifestyle. Like, okay, maybe it's time to go, like, there's a safe house there. Maybe it's time to like go restock on some water and weapons and things like that, and catch some shut-eye. Also, I want to approach this place at night, or I want to approach in like the middle of the day so that they'll be more huddled together, and I can take them out with one rocket, so I'm going to sleep till noon or something like that. And there's just so many aspects to this game that just really qualify. It's trying to be as immersive as possible and not feel like a game and not remind you that you're not in the game world. And it has so many, it simulates being in that game world so well, and it simulates so many systems so that nothing feels scripted. There's almost no scripting in the game. Things just happen, and you can create an unparalleled amount of chaos and fun with some of the weapons in the game, like the flamethrower, like the mortar is amazing, just being able to like mortar enemy positions. But of course they make it immersive as well, because I don't know if people realize this, but when you look through the sight of a mortar, you don't have some random bird's eye view of exactly where the mortar is going to hit. So how do you aim a mortar, especially in Far Cry 2? You put smoke rounds in it first. First you just guesstimate with the little rangefinder. Then you put smoke rounds in, and wherever the smoke rounds hit, that's where the next round's going to go. This exposes you, though, because the first round out of the gun, or out of the mortar, exposes you. And it's not going to do any damage to the enemy. So, but thankfully they make the mortars do a devastating amount of damage. But it's just, but it's fun. It's so much fun. So anyways, Far Cry 2. Games like Far Cry 3, they do less of the immersive aspect. You don't have to do as many things. Like, there's no weapon jamming. There's no need to sleep at safe houses or anything like that. It's actually difficult in that game to change time of day. Whereas you can just do it whenever you want when you find a safe house to sleep in Far Cry 2. You don't have to worry about getting sick. You don't have to worry about... also, the HUD is always up. The map isn't a physical thing. It's like some nether, shadow realm that you teleport into to look at the map. Weapons like mortars and stuff like that will just give you a bird's eye view. Now, one of the things that the Far Cry series does well is have highly systemic gameplay. So I'm going to do another video about sort of honorable mentions or immersive sim light, where they take a lot of elements that are very popular from immersive sims and sort of make them have more mainstream appeal. And that's definitely where Far Cry comes in. Far Cry is still one of my favorite franchises. I basically, except for New Dawn and Primal, I guess, a little bit, I pretty much will buy anything Far Cry immediately, without question. I'm that much of a fan. But I do recognize that ever since 2, there's been a lot of dumbing down of the series. Now, I do like instances like 4, which are in favor of more like sort of arcadey, fast-paced fun. And then there are games like 5, which tried to go back to some of the elements of 2. Oh yeah, that's the other thing about 2. You can select your character from the beginning of the game, and it'll change your appearance. Like there's a black guy, so your skin will be black. There's a guy with a tattoo on his arm. There's a woman, and the arms will be, I think, slightly skinnier and a different color. There's a guy who wears gloves and long sleeve shirts all the time. So you can customize which character you want to play as at the beginning. Technically, they have different stats, but not really. The gameplay is exactly the same with all of them. It's completely open-ended. You just do whatever you want, whenever you want. You're not prescribed to do the missions in certain orders or anything like that. You can just do however. And so Far Cry 5 kind of went back to this a little bit, but of course there's so many arcadey things in there, like regenerating health and things like that. And of course it's still got the little mini map in the corner constantly, and all the skill upgrade trees and stuff like that. That's another thing. It's Far Cry 2 is a little bit more like Thief, going for that real sort of purist immersive sim design philosophy. And that there's no RPG elements there. I mean, it is a role-playing game because you're playing the role of a, gun for hire, a soldier of fortune in some random third world country where there's just constant war and political strife, and you're just trying to profit off of it. It is a good way to role-play as that kind of person, or in that kind of situation. So I would call it a role-playing game, but it doesn't have any stat-based progression elements. You don't pick from a skill tree or anything like that. The closest thing you have is you can upgrade weapon reliability by buying service manuals from the gun shops and stuff like that. But anyways, Far Cry 2, an excellent, once again, a sort of non-traditional take on immersive sims that's actually more of a purist, or takes a more purist approach, ironically, closer to something like Thief or Thief 2, which is why I really appreciate games like Thief and Thief 2 showing that you don't have to have RPG elements, you don't have to have progression elements, you don't have to have stat rolls, you don't have to have dialogue trees or any of this stuff. You don't have to have any of this stuff to be an immersive sim. So, moving on. Fallout 3 is on here, but I'm not going to include it. BioShock 2. I'm not going to speak too much on this game. It largely keeps most of the gameplay aspects of BioShock 1 in. So, if we're considering BioShock 1 an immersive sim, BioShock 2 might as well be one as well. I just learned about this recently. Apparently, one of the reasons that at first glance, Bioshock 2 seems like a shameless cash grab, and I think that's what 2K wanted out of it. It's just that the people who worked on the game seem to have a lot more reverence for the source material than probably 2K did. So I have my issues with the plot, and I don't think it's as good as the original Bioshock, but it definitely explores some more interesting concepts, and I do like that Bioshock was sort of the ugly side, or the pitfalls with pure individualist ideology. Whereas Bioshock 2 is a commentary on, sort of the ultimate expression of collectivism and how it's basically just as bad or worse. I personally didn't like as much of the level design as Bioshock 2. Other people say, like, oh, I really like that, you could see, like, the underbelly of Bioshock and, like, the poor, living conditions and things like that. But it's like, you know what? Bioshock is a fantasy city. It doesn't exist. And I think that aesthetically, it just is much more enjoyable to be playing in, like, the creme de la creme of Rapture for the most part, because it sort of juxtaposes in a very satisfying way against the carnage and gunplay. And it gives you an excuse to have a lot of excellent Art Deco, which is my favorite architectural style, versus Bioshock 2 is like, what you've seen in a lot of shooters, a lot of green, brown, and gray slimy sort of places and hovels and things like that. I'm not saying it's all bad. I liked the department store. I liked Fontaine Futuristics. I liked the beginning of the game, and I liked playing as a little sister. That was pretty cool. Like seeing their sort of like warped view of reality that they've been sort of brainwashed into seeing the world as, so that they aren't subjected to the horrors of what's going on in Rapture. Oh, I liked Andrew Ryan's Journey to the Surface. That was great. I guess the things I just didn't like seeing dilapidated Rapture was cool in a couple of places, but it felt like it was too much like waterlogged, filled with coral and things like that. I liked all the Art Deco from Rapture, so just seeing it all underwater was just kind of like, eh. And I really didn't like all the, the low-income housing and stuff like that. But anyways, Bioshock 2 was really it's kind of amazing that it was as good as it was. I remember not liking it when I first played it, but I've since had a newfound sort of appreciation for it, and I think definitely the gameplay is a lot more action-packed and fun than Bioshock 1. I liked the improved hacking minigame as well. That's a massive improvement to Bioshock 1, because it allows you to kind of, first of all, time doesn't stop when you hack, so it adds a level of tension and danger to hacking, and it doesn't break the flow of gameplay, and it is actually a little bit more like an immersive sim in that sense, because it doesn't completely take you out of the game world to do it. So yeah, Bioshock 2, and I think, I found it recently on, I want to say NoClip, their documentary that they've started on Arcane Studios. Apparently Arcane was contracted to do a lot of work on Bioshock 2, so that's, I think, one of the reasons why it feels like such a, even though they had to set it in Rapture again, it feels like such a faithful sequel in a lot of ways, at least, like, exploring philosophical thematic elements, keeping with the sort of immersive sim design ethos and things like that. I think one of the reasons it really feels like that is because Arcane had a hand in it. So, in my opinion, not as good as Bioshock 1, but it's not a bad game either, and it's definitely, in my opinion, an immersive sim. Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas. So, one of the reasons I left Fallout 3, and of course Fallout 4 off of Fallout 3 is, like I said, is too much scripting. There's not enough simulation, and it is fairly immersive, but it kind of gets in its own way in a lot of ways too. It feels very sort of like stale and bland, and in its sort of immersive aspects. I've never found Fallout 3 to, the first time I played it ever, maybe it felt kind of immersive, but it was the only game like it that was out there. But then, you realize that there's, I don't know, there's something about the Bethesda games that just don't quite immerse the player as much as they should. There's a lot of design choices that they make that kind of make the game feel like a game. And I think for the Elder Scrolls, like I said, Oblivion kind of makes the list a little bit, but from Oblivion through Skyrim through Fallout 3, they started to become less immersive experiences and have less, sort of simulation and stuff like that. Especially Fallout 3, there's just a lot of scripting. Although it's definitely a better example than most games, and I would definitely put it in a, like I said, I'm going to do a sort of an immersive sim light list after I do this one, and so I would definitely put Fallout 3 there, but New Vegas sort of reclaims the title of being an immersive sim, first of all by allowing you to play Fallout New Vegas in survivor mode, which adds weight to every single object in the game, so your inventory management becomes that much more difficult. Even ammo starts to have weight, and you have to worry about carrying too much ammo and things like that. In addition to that, Fallout New Vegas' survival system makes you have to sleep, eat, and drink to stay alive, and it also very smartly adds cleverness into some of its systems, like for example the drinking system in the game. I remember Yahtzee Croshaw in his review was pissed that water dehydrates you more, but if you've ever lived in an incredibly dry climate and you've been really, really thirsty and dehydrated, you know for a fact that if you go and you grab a soda, you might quench your thirst momentarily, but in about 10-15 minutes you're going to feel even thirstier because there's a lot of sugar and a lot of shit in there that's not really helping hydrate you. So it's better to go for some water. So in a desert environment like that, it totally makes sense to me that drinking soda will not decrease your thirst level. I like that there's that level of depth to thinking about the role-playing elements and the immersive elements. And of course, I think another reason that Fallout 3 or Fallout New Vegas for me qualifies as an immersive sim is because the elements in the game, the sort of role-playing elements in the game, are not there to create a system where, oh, I can like max out my sword skill and max out this skill, and then I'll be able to like fly over the mountain, and then like, anyone that I hit with the sword will instantly combust. It's not about that. It's not about stat whoring or anything like that. A lot of the RPG elements in the game are there to provide immersion, and to some extent player choice, but player choice in the name of building more immersion, because they want the world to feel believable and they want to give you a lot to do in the world, a lot of ways to interact with the world and everything like that previous Fallout games and other Bethesda games just really don't have. So those stats are there to help create a more immersive experience, and that's to me is immersive because it's realistic. It's realistic. Like, yeah, in the heat of the desert, alcohol soda will not decrease your thirst. It's like the one thing you shouldn't be drinking, or the two things I guess you shouldn't be drinking are alcohol and soda. You should just go for water, and that you have to worry about ammo weight, because in reality ammo weighs a lot. In fact, one of the big complaints from soldiers is ammo weight, and that's why the government still uses small caliber rifle rounds, because the big stuff that they used to use in like World War II weighed a ton, and they want soldiers to have X number of rounds of ammunition. If you mandate they have to have 300 rounds of ammunition, well, most soldiers would rather carry 300 rounds of 5.56, which is a very, very small bullet compared to, and then the overall round is, well, it's not small, but it's light, versus like 30-06, which is a much heavier bullet, resulting in a much heavier round overall. So, things like that added into Fallout New Vegas. Also, the ability to reload ammunition. Again, they're really trying to get into the sort of simulation aspect of this, because you can bet your ass in a post-apocalyptic society that most people who don't even know what ammo reloading are would become intimately familiar with all the things that you need to do and all the equipment you need to reload ammunition. And so you have reloading benches. The other thing that's really smart about the reloading benches in Fallout New Vegas is that you can customize ammo. You can make ammo with, it's called plus P ammunition. So you put more powder than is recommended. It's still within a certain measured limit. You don't just put as much as you want. You put it within a certain limit. It's usually more than recommended, and they're called plus P loads. And they will make the bullet travel faster, which means it has more kinetic energy, but they put more stress on your gun. And a lot of guns will say that they're not rated for plus P loads, or a lot of guns will say that they don't recommend using plus P loads. And so, of course, in the game, what happens? Well, if you use them, you will do more damage, but your weapons will degrade faster. it's just like so many little things like that that go into reality. And surplus ammunition in the game will also make your weapons degrade faster, but it's really, really cheap. Much like if you get Russian ammunition, there's a lot of corrosive stuff in some of that Russian crap. So if you run a lot of surplus Russian stuff through some of your rifles, you may have to worry about cleaning them more often. Otherwise, you're going to start getting pitting and issues, metallurgical issues. So there's just so much thought into, going into that level of detail can actually start to add more immersion and more depth to the game, because it makes it feel so much more realistic. Like, wow, they really thought of everything when they made this game. And you have to collect different types. I believe you have to collect different types of primers, which again is exactly how you have to do it in reality. There's large rifle primers, small rifle primers, pistol primers. You can't just get a box of primers and expect it to work on everything you use. The weapon customization in the game, the amount of weapons that are just available in the game, again makes it feel really sort of immersive and fun. And they're weapons that make sense too. There's a lot of sort of cowboy style weapons because they are very popular in the Southwest. A lot of people still keep revolvers, they keep lever actions because it's sort of cultural, I guess. And so you'd find a lot of that kind of stuff. They also have a sort of AR-15 style rifle because that made more sense than some of the stuff that was available in Fallout 3, because at the time that this is supposed to take place, which is sort of like a pseudo 50s America, that weapon would have been sort of available, and it would have looked the way it looked in Fallout New Vegas with like the wood furniture or something like that. So that was really cool. All the different kind of effects that you can get sort of heat exhaustion effects, you can get different kind of poison effects, you can get different kind of, so basically you're gonna have a ton of effects affecting you at one time in the game. The survival skill and mechanics in the game, where you can use campfires to concoct all sorts of stuff for the desert, and it largely requires you to find desert-based plants and then mix them together with stuff to make new concoctions to buff your stats. The faction system in the game is incredibly immersive because it is more true to life rather than just being like in Fallout 3, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person. There's an actual faction system in this game where it's like, yeah, you could be hated by one faction and loved by another. It depends on what you did for them. Just because they heard you might have killed some innocent family on the other side of the wasteland, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you. They don't have anything to do with that family, and they don't even know if that's true. And how did they find out to begin with? So it makes much more sense to have faction systems. And the other thing I like is that you can actually be friendly. You can kind of be like a neutral entity, or at least just like a fly on the wall, and be almost friendly with everybody. There's only, I think it's just the NCR and the Legion that you can't share an alliance with. And maybe the Great Khans don't like one other faction. But pretty much everybody else you can be friends with. I think even the Powder Gangers and Goodsprings, you can be friends with them both at the same time. Another thing I really like is the attention to detail in terms of flora and fauna. Many of the new enemies are larger versions of animals that are localized to the American Southwest that you can only find here. And like the cazadores are the, I believe, tarantula hawk wasps with the black bodies and the bright orange wings, which are pretty much only in the American Southwest. So, and some of the scorpions and things like that. Also the plants, mesquite and mesquite pods, and the different types of barrel cactus fruit and things like that. The other thing I really love about Fallout New Vegas, again, that added to immersion and simulation, I hate seeing mods for Fallout New Vegas where they significantly change the look of the game. They make the dust really red, they make the plants really green and vibrant, because they've seen pictures of Sedona and they just assumed that's what the desert looks like. If you've ever been to Nevada, you understand why the government had no qualms about testing nukes there. It is absolute. It looks like it was like seabed, not 100 years ago. That's what it looks like. Except seabed would be more interesting because it'd be soft sand. It's all rock and dirt and very little scrub. It is ugly as hell. And Fallout New Vegas is ugly as hell. And that, again, adds to immersion because that's just how Nevada is. It's really, really, really ugly and really desolate. And they communicated that very well with the way the game looks and the color palette they used. So I loved all these aspects to the game. And then, of course, Fallout has already had some aspects that are very immersive and really help sell the world. And it is trying to be a bit of a simulation. There's not as much scripting in Fallout New Vegas. You can solve different quests in many, many different ways, whereas in Fallout 3, not every quest was like that. Some quests could only be finished in one way. And in Fallout New Vegas, there's a lot of different ways to do things. And the other thing I like about New Vegas is it like Deus Ex, it just kind of rolls with it. If people die that aren't necessarily supposed to die, the game will just kind of roll with it, you know? I love that you can walk straight into Caesar's Legion, walk straight up to Caesar and just blow his freaking head off, you know? And then if your skills are high enough, you can take out everyone in the tent, and then you can actually, you know, kill everyone in the Legion, which is cool. The only thing that bothers me is it doesn't affect the end fight. Because it's just like, I killed the Legion. They're gone. That should not... I mean, that would be great, but that's a little bit much to ask. So, yeah, Fallout New Vegas, I think it has more detail in it, and it's more committed to player immersion and role-playing, actual role-playing, player choice and player freedom than most other Bethesda games, and especially Fallout 3. So that's why, for me, New Vegas specifically makes it on the list, where the others don't. Divine Cybermancy. I have just started to get into this game. Mandalore Gaming does a really, really good review of it and kind of discusses everything. Basically, here's the setup. You play as some sort of like super soldier in some sort of steampunk future. Or not steampunk, cyberpunk future, and you have all of these different abilities because of all the technology implanted into your body and your armor that you can use. So you got your sort of mage-based RPG elements, you've got a shooter, and all the missions are just kind of like a mini open world that just lets you go for it. You might say like, well, you know, I thought we were just lumping in RPG FPSs in here just by dint of them being... Well, okay, but here's the thing about Divine Cybermancy. Divine Cybermancy isn't trying to create an incredibly immersive experience like Thief or Ultima Underworld. What it's trying to do is go the other route, the Deus Ex route, just total player choice and player freedom. And basically, it drops you in a mission, and it just lets you do things however you want. For example... I was tasked with killing, so I got dropped off at the beginning of this large open world. I was tasked with killing a gang leader, so instead of fighting through his goons in the front door, I snuck up the side of the building and I broke in, very immersive sim style, so I don't have to fight everybody at the front door. And then I talked to him, actually. I didn't just shoot him right in the face. I said, hey, I got sent here to kill you. And he's like, oh, please don't. And I was just like, well, I don't know, you want to make it worth my time? And he said, okay, I'll give you $250. And I was just like, can we make it more? He said, that's all I got. I was like, okay, so $250. Gives me $250, and then I shot him right in the face. The game didn't have any issues with any of that. You can do a lot of things. You can hack doors open. You can hack basically anything. You can hack other players. I mean, you can hack other NPCs and other players, actually. But you can hack other NPCs, and then they'll start fighting for you, or they'll kill themselves. You can fight with a sword, you can fight with pistols, you can choose whatever weapons you want and swap them out at these little recharge stations, and you have an incredible amount of skills that you have access to. You can jump super high, you can run super fast, you can teleport in a bunch of holographic clones of yourself that somehow do damage, and they'll start fighting the enemies for you. I mean, basically, it's just... the sky's the limit in terms of like the fun that you can have with the game, and it just goes ballistic. It goes balls to the wall. And so it's definitely more down that player choice and fun route, but it does let you play the game however you want. In certain quests, for example, if you're tasked with assassinating someone, you could either get a bribe from him and then tell him to disappear, and then tell superiors that you killed him and lie about it. You can try and sneak him and snipe him from far away. You can hack his own security camera or security stations to shoot at him, or you can pay someone or hack someone and take control of them and send them in to kill him, and then they deal with it, and then the gang won't be mad at you, and you can just walk in and do whatever. So giving the player these levels of options in the game, this level of customization of your character, this level of access to different abilities and stuff like that, I think goes into that sort of immersive sim territory of just, all right, it's not going to be a super highly immersive game world, you know, like something like Far Cry 2 where you really feel like you're there, but it is going to give the player, make the player feel that the world has limitless possibilities, like it would in reality if all these things existed. And we're not going to script anything. We're not going to stop the player from just doing whatever. Here's the world. Here's the systems. Figure it out. And it's very much in that design philosophy. And so it's about pure fun, and it's about pure player choice and player expression. So in that sense, I think I Divine Cybermancy absolutely qualifies. And it is also a hidden gem. It's amazing. I started playing it recently. It is so much freaking fun. And it runs fairly well too. It's an old Source Engine game, but it runs really well, and it's largely bug free. So I would definitely recommend it to anyone. Moving on the list, Deus Ex: Human Revolution. I already spoke about the other two Deus Ex games a lot. I'm not gonna speak. I mean, you know why. I would say in some aspects, this and Mankind Divided are a bit more immersive. I think the improved, it's not just the graphics, it's the aesthetic, it's the design, the art design. I think the improved art design helps with that. I think the fact that there are a lot more elements to make the games feel more like grounded and real helps as well. Especially Mankind Divided is a lot more of the sort of immersion aspect. You really feel like you're in that world because you can just go into anyone's house and you can find like their empty beer bottles or like a cup of coffee that's still warm because they just stepped out, and you can read all about them, and it has nothing to do with the plot. It may not even lead to a side quest or like a thing of loot, but you can do it, and it's like this whole city that's just there and simulated, and you feel like you're there. And you can go do whatever you want. You can go get a cup of coffee, you can talk to whoever you want, you can break into a nightclub and talk to the owner. Another thing you can do I'm talking more about Mankind Divided here, of course, but this applies to Human Revolution to some extent. In Human Revolution, you have I think they did speech augments the best way that they could, where you get these like sort of hormone or pheromone detectors. And so when you're talking to someone, you can figure out what psychological tactic is going to work more effectively against them to get them to agree with you or get them to do what you want them to do. So that was a great addition to the game because upping your speech skill doesn't really make sense, especially in a cyberpunk context, unless it's explained like that. So I really liked that. And Human Revolution again and Mankind Divided have much, much better stealth systems, I think. They're still not great. I still have issues with them, but stealth is a lot more functional. And it's almost mandatory. It's a little bit harder to play these games just busting down the door with guns blazing. You do need to be sneakier and more careful. They kept the inventory system from the original Deus Ex, where it's a grid-based, classic one that I like, the grid-based one. And but they are a little bit lighter than the other games. You can't direct the story as much as you can in the other two games, and there's not as much complete freedom. Like, you can't just kill plot-relevant NPCs with impunity in Human Revolution or Mankind Divided. So, I mean, yeah, there's been some concessions made, but largely the DNA is still there. And yeah, it's a simulated world. It's immersive. But like I said, I think that these are still in that original Deus Ex camp of being more about player freedom and player choice, but much less than the original because they are more scripted experiences. There's more scripting in especially Human Revolution. There's less branching choices and there's less overall freedom in the game world. But it is still far and away a better representation of immersive sims than most games that come out these days. So I would still include them on the list, and they're excellent games. And for me personally, I like the art direction and aesthetic of the new Deus Ex way better than the original Deus Ex 1 because I feel like it sells the whole mood and feeling and themes of Deus Ex way better than the first game did. And it really makes it feel more cyberpunk. than the first game ever did, especially Og City and Mankind Divided.